One of the areas that I've been working on in my own practice is supporting students in asking better questions themselves. Not only does asking a good question show that you've got a good understanding of the topic and that you're doing higher order thinking, but it's also going to encourage the students to be more metacognitive, and therefore they are guiding and supporting their own learning as well as just relying on us as well. So if we can encourage our students to ask those better questions, then that's going to result in greater progress for them. The first strategy that I've started to use to do so is the question matrix. So for the question matrix, you need to start off with something that you want the students to create a question about. So if I start off with a photo like this one, I want the students to start thinking about elements behind this photo by creating their own questions. So to help the students by creating these questions, initially I might just end up with some very basic questions. But actually what I want them to do is I want them to start thinking about some of the higher level questions. So if I put the question matrix behind this photo, then rather than students focusing on what is or what has happened here, or where is this, when did this happen, these questions up in this top corner, actually it might encourage some of our students to thinking about some of these higher order questions down here. How might we prevent this from happening in the future? So what we can do is obviously we can use post-it notes to encourage the students to think about where these questions might be. But also what you can do is if you pop this onto an interactive platform for students to be able to add their own questions, then they can share these with each other on Google Classroom and see the different questions that they're coming up with. Then it might be that later on you want to resort back to some of these questions for the students to be able to answer them later. And as you can see, the level of difficulty coming up with these questions down here in the bottom right-hand corner, they're more challenging to come up with these questions. The second strategy that I've been looking at is looking at goal-free problems. Ultimately, what we find is that too often the students will miss out huge chunks of information in a question, and therefore they'll jump straight to the bit that they think is the question, rather than focusing on some of the key information that's going to be there for them. So actually, if we eliminate the question, then there's not going to be something for them to jump straight to. So if all I've done here is I've cropped off the question that would appear at the bottom of this in an exam paper. So actually all they've got is they've got some information about Lily's visit to an arcade. And there is no question for them to answer. But then what I want the students to do is I want them to analyse the information that they've been given and start to tell me, well, actually, what question could they be asked? Because if a student can tell me what question they could be asked, then it means they've got a really secure understanding of all of the different information that's been provided to them in that question, and therefore how they could go about answering those questions. As a challenge then, I would ask the students, okay, well, for one of your chosen questions that you've developed, can you think about how many marks that question might be worth? Can you think about which question you've chosen would be the most difficult, and which question you've chosen would be the most straightforward? And therefore, for one of those questions, could you develop what the mark scheme may look like and how many marks that question would be worth?